Hi, my name is Walt Pearson, and I'm recently retired, and my job was to make money. And let me tell you a little bit how I made this money. I was an equity portfolio manager, and my job was really to find the next Steph Curry or Tom Brady, but instead of athletes, it was to do with companies, businesses, stocks. And let me tell you a little bit of how I got into doing that, because my background is probably very similar to yours. I grew up in a housing project in Brooklyn, New York. Bushwick Highland Housing Project, which was about 6 blocks from Marcy Projects. And Marcy Project is very famous for Jay-Z, the great rapper. He came out of Marcy Projects. I didn't know him. He was about 10 years younger than me, but our projects weren't too far from each other. And I was at a public school across the street from my home, doing very well. I was in an intelligent, gifted, talented program. And the guidance counselor came up to my mother and said, "You have 3 bright kids, and some of the independent schools of Brooklyn are looking for smart kids of color. If they test well, they can get into some of these schools." My mother said, "I'm all for it. I want my kids to test to see if I know they can do well, and I want them to go to these independent schools." And it turned out we passed the test, and I went from a public school that I loved across the street from my house, that was all black and Puerto Rican, to the other side of Brooklyn, about 45 minutes an hour, 2 buses away from me, to a school that wasn't that many blacks. And my mother said, "You have to learn to get to know everybody, and the world is not run by black people and Puerto Rican people, it's run by white people, so you gotta go to school with them." And this was an interesting experience for me, because while I was there, I started to, first it was tough, but then I really started to gradually like it. But in 8th grade, I went there in 5th grade, and in 8th grade something critically important happened. I started an underground newspaper that used to poke fun of teachers. This one particular issue poked fun of the math teacher, Mr. Stevens. He found a copy of it. And he came to me and said, "Walt, if I go to the headmaster with this, you know you're gonna get kicked out because you've already been suspended 1 time." I said, "Mr. Stevens, I'll do anything not to get kicked out. Please, I'll do anything. It'll crush my mother." And they had already kicked out my twin brother for fighting. So my mother would have been devastated if both of us had been kicked out. So Mr. Stevens said to me, he said, "You know, you're good in math. Have you ever thought about following stocks?" I was like, "I don't even know what a stock is, Mr. Stevens. I mean, I come from modest means, a housing project, I don't know what stocks." So he whipped out the New York Times business section. He said, "Well, what companies do you know?" I said, "Well, only thing I know AT&T, IBM." He said, "Okay, well, let's follow these companies." And he started talking to me about these companies, and he started showing me their stocks and started talking about the language of the stock market. And I said, "Any books I can read on this, Mr. Stevens?" He said, "There's a book called Money Masters by John Train." I said, "Okay, I'm gonna read that book." And I said, "I hate reading Shakespeare. I hope it's not like Shakespeare." He said, "No, this is not like Shakespeare." I got the book, and one night I read it all. I just was hooked. And it talked about the greatest investors of all time and what made them unique and why they were great investors, like Warren Buffett, Bernard Baruch, John Templeton, Philip Fisher. I came back the next day, I read it in one night. I said, "Mr. Stevens, I love this, absolutely love it. Any more books to read?" He told me about some other books. I said, "Can you make a career doing this?" He said, "There's something called Wall Street. You can make a career doing this. And not only that, you can make a lot of money." I said, "Whoa, you don't give me any more Shakespeare." I said, "This is what I want to do. I want to do this." And so I was hooked, and I started reading as much as I could about history of the market, the greatest investors, and started learning the lingo. And more importantly, I started a paper portfolio because I didn't have any money to invest. But Mr. Stevens got me to think about companies I liked, and we would start tracking those companies, and that's what I did. And so all was well, and then I got accepted to the best independent school in Brooklyn, Poly Prep, but they didn't accept my twin brother, and I couldn't go there by myself, my mother said, because I would have to get off the subway and walk through 6 blocks of a tough Italian neighborhood where I would have probably beat up every day. So my mother said, "No, you either stay in Berkeley Institute where I was, or which is now called Berkeley Carroll, or I took the test for Brooklyn Tech." She said, "You can go to Brooklyn Tech." And I said, "I'm gonna go to Brooklyn Tech." And Brooklyn Tech was a great school in Brooklyn. The only problem was most of my buddies went to Brooklyn Tech. And so I got sidetracked there, and as I was doing so well, I for a couple years, I went from being a great student to clowning around and not applying myself, and I was also a good basketball player. And I made the varsity basketball team my junior year. I became one of the better players on the team. And the summer between my junior and senior year, I took a lot of visits to schools to visit for basketball. Vanderbilt, Wichita State, Providence, St. Bonaventure, Fordham. So I thought I was going to be a big-time basketball star. Even though I was only 6'2", I thought I was going to be next Walt Frazier or Earl Monroe. And in my senior year in Brooklyn Tech, the playoff game, we had a big playoff game where we were favored to win. I played absolutely my worst game ever. I came home, I told my mother, I said, I don't feel well. I don't know what's going on. She said, you must have the flu. Just go to bed. I went to bed, got up, I kept regressing. My mother took me to the emergency room and they sent me home. They said, probably flu. Went back home. Things kept regressing again. And she took me back and they did some blood work and turned out I had mononucleosis. And I ended up 7 days in the hospital, which is how bad it was. And also, I had to stay home for another couple weeks after I got out of the hospital. So I missed all of AAU season, all the All-Star games. And every school that offered me a scholarship, a bachelor's scholarship, basically revoked it, except for St. Francis College in Brooklyn, New York. They said, we're still gonna honor our scholarship. You're gonna be one of our top recruits. And we didn't have any money, so I said, I'm going there to play basketball. I promised my mother I would get serious about the books again and be a great student athlete. And that's exactly what I did. I did very well there, exceptionally well. And I was able to land a job, and it was interesting. I had accepted a job to be a credit training program at a commercial bank. I saw this ad in Black Enterprise magazine, and it said, financial service companies looking for associate investment analysts. So I said, I have nothing to lose. Send in my cover letter, resume. I already knew I had a great job. I get a call from the director of research there. He says, we have a place in Central Park at the Essex House. I'm gonna be there, I wanna meet you, let's talk. So I go up to this suite. I had never seen anything like this before in my life. The suite overlooked Central Park. It was absolutely fantastic, it was beautiful. And I'm talking to the director of research. His company was Allstate Insurance. And we're talking, and he's interviewing me. He just couldn't believe this kid from the housing projects. I had this paper portfolio, I knew about the market. And I knew the lingo. He said, I'm gonna bring you back to Chicago. I want you to meet my colleagues. So I went back to Chicago, met 8 of his colleagues, went well, went back to New York. He said, I want to bring you out again. They brought me out again and met a bunch of more colleagues, sent me back home. And this time they sent me home, they called me up and said, we want to bring you out one more time. They brought me back out to Chicago again, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do stocks. I was a stock jockey, I could already see it. So instead of going to a credit training program at the bank, I went to work for Allstate Insurance Company as an investment analyst. And there I met a gentleman named Sam Nakagawa who really was patient enough to talk me more about the business. How to invest in companies, how to understand companies' competition, earnings, cash flow, revenues, what components of revenues, just everything I needed to know, and I absolutely fell in love with the business. I did that for 4 years and was fortunate enough to get into Harvard Business School. And there, Wall Street was, everybody even went to consulting at Wall Street, it seemed like back in those days. And I went to Wall Street after working after being at Harvard Business School. But my summer between first and second year of business school, I did mergers and acquisitions at investment bank and absolutely hated it and said, I want to go back to investment business. So that's what I did when I came out. And along the way, I went from being an analyst to actually starting to manage portfolios. And this is what I come back to, what I said in the beginning. So my job was to really find the next Tom Brady. Remember, Tom Brady was selected, I think, in the 6th round, ended up becoming maybe the greatest of all time. And Steph Curry was selected, I think, the 7th or 8th pick in the 1st round, but nobody had ever heard of him until the NCAA run he had. So these are the kind of things we're trying to find, undiscovered companies early on in the embryonic stage. And those companies will run for multiple years. You make big time, make huge returns on your investment. That's what my job was to try to do, find companies like that, these great businesses, selling at a very reasonable valuation, and hold on for a long time. And if you believe in these companies, when they go down, you buy some more and you do very well. And the beauty of that business is, goes back to something my mother told me many years ago. She said, to try to go into a business or profession where you're not judged by the color of your skin, it's a meritocracy. And being in an investment business, there's a scorecard on you every day, your performance, how well your portfolio does, how well these stocks does. So that was the beauty of the business. It also, at 22 years old, I was in office of Roberto Goizueta, who at the time was the chairman and CEO of Coca-Cola. I called my mother and said, I just spent an hour and a half interviewing Roberto Goizueta. And she said, is he the CEO of Coca-Cola? I said, yes. She said, just you? I said, yeah. She said, wow, what kind of responsibility they give you at such a young age? Are they crazy? I said, well, that's what the beauty of the business. At a very young age, you get a lot of responsibility, and it's very intellectually stimulating. And so I could apply my attributes for energy and satisfaction. And then my father, on the other hand, I told him I was a securities analyst, and he said, all the education you got and you guard people? He didn't understand anything about Wall Street. So, but here I was, very young, getting all this responsibility, which is the beauty of the investment business. And if you're good, they'll give it to you. And I parlayed that into a career, 40 years of Wall Street, and it was a great run, very lucrative. You get a chance to intellectually stimulating. If you're good and you like digging and doing research and reading, you have to have good analytical skills, good oral communication skills, written communication skills. It is one of the most fabulous businesses in the world. I like to see more people of color get into the business. And that's really my story. And along the way, I've met some fabulous people, built up a great network, and been able to give back. I've been able to help other people get into business, which has really been nice. And also, I love giving back to our community. So that's really my story.